um, which really allows us to realize that there's many parts of the brain that have to integrate together, right? So first they have to develop, and then they come and they work together without getting lost in each other. And that's what we mean by integration. It's the pieces of the brain working together so that, again, information that is brought in can be used in the most effective way possible. Some parts of the brain that are working here are the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, as we know, is one of the last parts of the brain to develop. It allows us to have two thoughts, two feelings at a time. It allows us to temper ourselves. It's the part of the brain that goes on the one hand, on the other hand. And of course, we all know for problem solving, you need to be able to look at many aspects at one time. The key thing here is that that prefrontal cortex doesn't actually start to engage with the other parts of the brain in a very active way until at least 5 to 7 years old. We have the corpus callosum, which is basically the bridge between the two parts of the brain, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And I'll get into more about that in a little bit later. And then we have our two hemispheres, the right and the left hemisphere. The left one, which is primarily preoccupied with facts, and the right hemisphere, which is primarily preoccupied with the whole picture. And again, we need to understand that that all these parts of the brain don't function well together until they are actually starting to develop. And we need to make sure that we don't just look at one part of the brain and be happy with that, but we really need to make sure that all of the parts of the brain are growing and developing. So I'm using, for this part of the material that I'm presenting, a book written by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary, where he did a full survey of right hemisphere, left hemisphere brain functioning. And he came to some very interesting conclusions. Some of you that might have studied some of this in your psychology courses know that way back in the olden days, we used to do horrible things to people's brains. We actually used to cut the corpus callosum so that the left and right hemisphere could not communicate with each other. And boy, did we ever find out some interesting things. If you want to find out about that, go read Ian McGilchrist's book, or I also have a link that I will be providing to you a bit later, where you have an interview with him. This is what I have gleaned from the material that he pulled together. So first of all, just to understand about these divided brains. We have one hemisphere that's for narrow attention that enables, and birds and animals have this, to lock into whatever they need to get. So the seed among the pebbles. And actually, the eyes on the side of the head allow one part of the brain to focus on one thing and the other part of the brain to focus on the other thing. The other hemisphere is for what he calls vigilant attention. So you look at the world at large to make sense of it, because actually the bottom line is you want to eat the seeds, not the pebbles, but the seeds, so that you can feed yourself. But you also need to be careful while you're trying to figure out which is a seed and which is a pebble, that you're not going to be eaten by somebody else. So your brain needs these two parts, one which focuses on the specific and the other which focuses on the general. In humans, we use our left hemisphere generally, and again, I'm being very general here, but most of us are right-handed, and the right hand crosses over into the left hemisphere, and exactly that. Our hand manipulates, grasps. It's the specifics of the brain. It's the details. It's like looking for the seed amongst the pebbles. And the right hemisphere is really meant to understand the world at large, how things relate to one another, and the relationship of the brain or the body or who we are as beings to all of what is out there around.